used to cover up crimes such as torture, enforced disappearances, or illegal detentions. Governments must refrain from using legal frameworks as instruments of politically motivated prosecutions. The fairness and impartiality of judicial processes are critical to maintaining public trust in democracy. This case tests our collective commitment to human rights and press freedom. If we tolerate the persecution of those who reveal the truth, we undermine the very foundation of pluralistic democratic society. The core values of our organization oblige us to stand firmly in defense of justice, the rule of law, transparency, and human rights. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Vardanyan. And now we go to Ms. Gökçe Gökçen from Turkey.
Merci, Madame la Présidente.
Thank you, dear colleagues. First of all, I would like to thank the rapporteur for this excellent work. The disproportionate way Julian Assange was persecuted has a chilling effect on the media in the US and worldwide. Revealing human rights abuses is an act of journalism, and abusing the Espionage Act sends a message to authoritarian regimes, some of which are concerned by the information revealed on WikiLeaks. This encourages these regimes to threaten our democracies. Abusing the Espionage Act sends another message to the citizens. Individuals report that if they speak up against human rights abuses, they can be marginalized, even prosecuted. Today, similar laws to the Espionage Act are being prepared in many countries. These laws target journalists, but also civil society activism, freedom of association, and even diplomatic activity. Public rumors of this type of law have a chilling effect. I know associations in Turkey that have stopped their activity because of this. It is normal that states are able to keep state secrets in order to protect their national security interests. But where do we draw the line? That is the question in Europe and worldwide. In a time of geopolitical crisis, of course, there are security problems, and we will continue having security problems. But the question is, how are we going to address these security issues? Under the rule of law and with our democratic values, or outside this framework? We must always uphold our values: human rights, freedom of speech, freedom of association. These are values that make Europe, Europe. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Gökçen. And now, Mr. Christophe Bricot from Monaco.
Merci, Madame la Présidente.
Thank you, Madam President. I would also like to congratulate the rapporteur for the excellent report which has been presented today. This deals with the substance of issues such as the right to information and the balance to be found between state secrets necessary to protect us in a dangerous world and the right of journalists to do their job and to keep the public informed. What's particularly surprising in this case is that the work done is actually famous and notorious. It's rather simpler to the Panama Papers. It's like Watergate, if you like. Back then, the journalists who carried out the investigations became famous. They had films made about them. We have to remember that news and information must be available to the public because news, information are the beating heart of democracy. Citizens who are well informed are in a position to take enlightened decisions. And everything we've heard this week confirms that. It's essential that we ensure that journalists be in a position to disseminate news and information while protecting their sources and their readers. That's very important if the world is to remain informed. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Bricot. And now I give the floor to Konstantinos Evstasiou from Cyprus.
Συγχαίρω την εισηγήτρια για την πολύ γενναία και αποκαλυπτική της έκθεση.
Thank you for this very revealing report. This must be a wake-up call. The Assange case must truly be a wake-up call for the future in the face of the suppression of political freedoms for European citizens in the name of an abuse of political correctness. The unfair treatment of Julian Assange is shocking. This is an obstacle to the defense of human rights, and especially media freedom and freedom of information. Julian Assange was instrumentalized in order to create a climate of fear, creating a chilling effect on the media to silence them. The harsh and disproportionate treatment of Julian Assange reveals how dysfunctional our democratic institutions are and the practices of some governments which are unacceptable, especially when their interests are threatened by the revelation of the truth. Revealing the truth should not be prosecuted on the pretext of national security. On the contrary, we must protect such a whistleblowing of secret information, first of all through self-regulation and according to the principle of responsibility and transparency. In Assange's case, all this has been instrumentalized for repressive purposes against the principles of the rule of law. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Eustachiou. And now I give the floor to Anna-Kristiina Mikkonen from Finland.
Madam President, colleagues, I would like to start by thanking the rapporteur, Suna, for her excellent work. At a time marked by fake news and alternative reality, the public's ability to read in a critical way information sources is essential. In Europe and the whole world, indeed, the importance of press freedom and the freedom of expression has been cast into stark relief by the threats they face. Media and journalists have to share responsibility when it comes to the fight against dissemination of propaganda. So as to save our common values, we have to strengthen trust in democratic institutions and increase resilience of society as a whole. The watchdog role of the press guarantees that democratic states, underpinned by the rule of law, operate effectively. This role of the press is particularly important in the light of the brutality of current armed conflicts and the growing number and growing seriousness of acts of transnational repression. If public institutions are not able to respond effectively and appropriately to abuse, the role of the press and whistleblowers becomes crucial. WikiLeaks publications, for example, have confirmed the existence of secret prisons, as well as secret and illegal kidnapping and transfers of prisoners carried out by the United States on European territory. The first legal action taken against Mr. Assange concerned accusations of hacking. Mr. Assange was also charged under the American law on espionage dating back to 1917. This meant that Mr. Assange thereby became the first director of a news outlet to have been prosecuted by dint of this legislation for having published classified information obtained from a whistleblower. The Assange case, and in particular the role of Manning, is a very good reason to continue our efforts to try to achieve better protection of whistleblowers throughout the world. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Ms. Mickelman. And now I give the floor to Paul Gavan from Ireland.
Thank you, Madam Chairperson. This week we saw the Parliamentary Assembly of the Council of Europe at its worst and at its best. Its worst moment was the continuing refusal to take a stand against the genocide being prosecuted against the Palestinian people. Its best moment was the powerful testimony of Julian Assange at the Committee for Legal Affairs yesterday. I salute Julian for his incredible courage and valour. I salute the work of all of those, both within and outside this Assembly, who have worked for Julian's freedom. And I believe it was truly significant that Julian, in his remarks, made a number of references both to Ukraine and Gaza and the deliberate murder of journalists in both locations. So I want to commend the rapporteur for this powerful and timely report. The calling out of transnational repression and politically motivated prosecution should be recognised and commended. It is needed now more than ever. And please let us reject, in the strongest terms, this attempt to deny that Julian's incarceration and torture were not politically motivated. The dogs in the street know that Julian's case was all about politics. As an Irish Republican, I would also point out that Britain, unfortunately, has a long history of denying political prisoners. True. We need to look at the subject matter that Julian exposed, which was political, the exposure of war crimes. We need to look at the vital public information that he put into the public domain, which was of a political nature. We need to look at the offence with which he was charged, a textbook political offence. Not to mention the fact that the CIA planned to kidnap and assassinate him. How on earth could this not be a political action? Julian put it best yesterday. He said the fundamental issue is simple. Journalists should not be prosecuted for doing their jobs. One of the most frustrating things over the last 5 years is that a large chunk of the body politic, both here and across Europe, chose to bury their heads in the sand. They chose to be silent in relation to this outrageous series of acts against this fine man. And it's disappointing to note that today, this is the shortest list of political speakers for any debate this week. What does that tell us about the continuing silence? So the least we can do today is endorse this report, endorse this excellent report, because our job is to defend media freedom, and it's needed now more than ever. And I will finish with another short quotation from Julian yesterday, which I think should also apply to us all. Let us stop gagging, torturing, and killing each other for a change. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Gavan. And now Mr. Didier Marie from France.
Ça y est, je crois que ça fonctionne. Merci, Madame.
Thank you. I would like to congratulate our colleague Suna for the quality of her report. And I'd like to thank Mr. Assange, who spoke for the first time since he was released from prison before the Committee of Legal Affairs. Our Assembly, as early as 2011, had adopted a resolution for the abuse of the argument of national security and state secrets as an obstacle to parliamentary oversight of human rights violations, and his situation is not only an individual case, even though we can only imagine the impact that the 14 last years have had on him, but his case highlights the tension between state secrets and democracy, state secrets and upholding human rights, protecting the interests of states and protecting whistleblowers. The resolution proposed today is balanced because it recognizes legitimate measures viewing to protect state secrets and national security, but the draft resolution reaffirms very strongly that informations related to the responsibility of state officials having perpetrated war crimes or human rights violations are not secrets that should be protected. Some sometimes believe that the respect of human rights and the rule of law are something that is adjustable, that is flexible. It seems very important that we state once again the principles of the Convention of Human Rights in their entirety. It's not a menu that you can cherry pick. Human rights must not be denied or diminished depending on circumstances. Yesterday, before the Committee on Legal Affairs, Julian Assange stated that he was not free today because the system worked, but because after years of incarceration, he had pleaded guilty of journalism, guilty of seeking information from a source and informing the public. Our rapporteur underlines what is at stake here, the proportionality of what he is accused of in the United States. He fears that his condemnation under the Espionage Act may create a chilling effect for journalists, editors, whistleblowers and media outlets. This is a very complex debate, legally speaking. I would underline that the case of Julian Assange, as well as others, has led to legislative adaptations in many states. Under François Hollande, the French Parliament adopted in 2016 a first law about the protection of whistleblowers, which was adjusted in 2022, transposing a European directive at the initiative of Sylvain Basserman, a former member of PACE. I hope that this debate and this resolution will be heard beyond the Council of Europe and will enable us to protect freedom of expression and whistleblowers. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Marier. And now, Mr. Julian Paulke from Germany.
Thank you, Madam Chair. First of all, thank you for coming here, Julian. It's a pleasure and a privilege having you here in this parliamentary assembly that is a democratic assembly for the protection of human rights. And dear Suna, thank you for looking into this matter with diligence, with patience, and with a clear view on what is important on this topic. Julian Assange is a journalist, I would say, of a different kind. He's not writing catchy articles, selecting headlines, but he was publishing. And therefore, this considers to be journalism. And therefore, the release is not a win for the freedom of press. At the end, it was a deal that was helping the United States to maintain their image. And Julian Assange is not a whistleblower. He was handling the data others provided to WikiLeaks. And WikiLeaks and their behavior can be debated on a moral basis, but not on a legal one. But the consequences for the freedom of press are a chilling effect. And in the center of this chilling effect, and the root cause, is the Espionage Act. And in the consequences, we need to pay attention what the consequences for our member states, for the Council of Europe, and for Europe itself can be. And I believe we need an umbrella of protection against the Espionage Act in the Council of Europe member states, to protect civil society organizations, to protect the freedom of press, and to protect whistleblowers and those who are publishing their data and knowledge. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Paulke. And now Mrs. Petra Bayer from Austria.
Ja, herzlichen Dank. Ich möchte mich auch zuerst bei Suna bedanken für diesen wichtigen Bericht.
Thank you. I would also like to thank Suna for this excellent report. I would also, of course, like to thank Julian Assange not only for the enormous courage he's shown over the years, but also the fact that just 3 months after his release, he's found his way to us here in the Council of Europe and its Parliamentary Assembly. I think that underlines the importance of the work the Council has been doing when it comes to defending press freedom when it's under threat. That means that we have to ensure that whistleblowers get the protection they need and deserve. As we can see that the situation surrounding the Assange case goes far beyond Europe. At a time of ever greater pressure on the rule of law, it's important that we step up our game so as to ensure that we can better protect freedom and enable independent media to continue to exist, since they have such an important role in telling the truth and providing critical thinking, which is essential if we are to see through fake news. freedom of expression and press freedom are two of the foundations of a free society. On a personal note, this has been something of a specialization for me in my work as a politician over the last 15 years, dating back to the days when I was involved in school newspapers as a young person in Vienna. So press freedom is essential. I'm delighted not only that Julian Assange has been released. That is, of course, a good thing, although it took far too long. What I do regret is that his release wasn't underpinned by a legal verdict. I think it would have been very important to have some kind of legal ruling which would have provided greater legal certainty to people who dare to denounce illegal action. So without a ruling from either the UK court or the European Court of Human Rights, this does leave something of a void, which means that there's a justified fear that such goings-on can continue and that journalists won't necessarily benefit from protection. So I think it's our job to ensure that people who want to divulge what's going on get our support. And the deterrence value of Julian Assange having passed all those years, spent all those years in solitary confinement is enormous. So it's essential that we do our best to guarantee the space so that whistleblowers and journalists can divulge information of this type.
Thank you, Ms. Bair. And now the floor goes to Mr. George Loukaides from Cyprus.
Thank you, Madam Chairperson. Dear colleagues, I want to extend my deep appreciation to our rapporteur for her important report addressing a matter that has sparked considerable concern both across Europe, the US, and beyond. I fully share the rapporteur's deep alarm over the profound implications that Assange's previous continued detention and eventual conviction under the Espionage Act entails for the future of press freedom, human rights, and investigative journalism. The findings of this report highlight a troubling precedent. A journalist has been prosecuted for publishing information exposing state misconduct, including war crimes, torture, arbitrary detention, and other human rights violations. This strikes at the very heart of democratic accountability. It is essential that we recognize the long-term chilling effects on freedom of expression at a global scale. Let us not forget that investigative journalists who often risk their lives and liberty to expose injustice rely on the ability to publish sensitive information in order to be able to inform us, the public, of governmental wrongdoings. Assange's case sets an alarming precedent for journalists and whistleblowers who now face criminal prosecution simply for doing their duty in revealing the truth. Furthermore, journalists working for small media outlets or as independent editors many times lack the financial ability to meet the subsequent legal burdens and costs to defend themselves. By targeting investigative journalists, dear colleagues, silencing impartial and responsible reporting, and covering up corruption-related allegations, we are in fact sending a clear signal that those who reveal government crimes, rather than those who commit them, will be the ones punished. Furthermore, we are deeply concerned that such actions will discourage other journalists and media organizations from reporting on issues of significant public concern. This will lead to increased self-censorship. Such a development would, in the long run, erode the foundation of democracy itself, where informed citizens hold their governments accountable. For those of us committed to defending the rights of workers, minorities, and the most vulnerable, this is not just an abstract legal question. The ability to expose abuses of power and corruption are essential in the fight for social justice, equality, and human dignity. The case of Julian Assange, therefore, echoes our broader efforts aimed at protecting our democratic institutions and our right to freely question and criticize those in positions of authority. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Lokaides. And now, Mr. Emmanuel Fernandez from France.
Merci.
Thank you, dear colleagues. Mr. and Mrs. Assange. First of all, I'd like to thank the rapporteur for her very precious work I fully agree with. The reason we're here today is not only because Julian Assange is here, we're also here for Sabri Al-Qurashi, an artist who has painted over 3,000 paintings and whose art is known worldwide. Sabri was tortured over 15 years in Guantanamo and released without a trial, without a verdict. He wasted a third of his life, and we know this thanks to the report published on WikiLeaks about Guantanamo Bay, the illegal extradition and torture of over 700 Muslim men and boys, many of whom were innocents. We're here for Khaled El-Masri, a German national who was kidnapped, extradited, sodomized and tortured by a CIA agent when he was holidaying in Macedonia. We know that this was a case of mistaken identity for which the US then exerted pressure on the German government so that they would not prosecute the CIA agent. And Mr. El-Masri used WikiLeaks communiques to demonstrate this before the Court of Human Rights that ruled in his favor. Yes, Julian Assange has worked for human rights, revealing the implication of so-called democratic states in ghastly crimes. He worked for the public interest, including my country, France, revealing that the US National Security Agency, NSA, wiretapped 3 French presidents between 2006 and 2013. In France, in September 2023, the investigating journalist of the site disclosed, Ariane Lavrieux, was incarcerated for 39 hours. Her home was searched. Her phone and computer data was gathered. And 2 years earlier, she had revealed that France was an accomplice in the extrajudicial killing of hundreds of people in Egypt. By voting in favor of the text we have before us today, we will contribute to making sure that the persecution of Julian Assange never happens again. These revelations, exercising the activity of journalists in the most brilliant way, means that Julian Assange was incarcerated as a political prisoner. The resolution 19,000 from 2012 very clearly outlines the criteria for political prisoners. A person deprived of their individual liberty is considered as a political prisoner if he is detained in violation of one of the fundamental guarantees enshrined in the European Convention of Human Rights and its protocols, especially freedom of speech. Dear colleagues, we have a heavy responsibility to guarantee justice for those who were killed, mutilated and brutalized in the wars that have occurred, but also those that are currently underway and those that will happen. Today, we must contribute to making sure that journalists aren't silenced or killed with impunity, to make sure that civilians can live in peace, and to foster a democratic culture in our societies. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Fernandez. And now, Ms. Laura Castel from Spain.
Thank you, Chair. Colleagues, every day we make choices that set the course of the daily lives and human rights of millions of citizens. Since I am here, I seek to do this duty with diligence and in good conscience. Because after all, if we, as the guardians of the European Convention, do not choose to secure human rights, who else will? There are a number of important areas covered in this excellent report, including transnational repression, extraterritorial application of US laws, absolute impunity for war criminals, and more. Besides, I want to acknowledge the suffering of Mr. Assange's loved ones and him, but also to take you closer to my home in Catalonia and the Pegasus affair, when at least 70 members of Catalan civil society were systematically and repeatedly spied upon. Because there is something to be said about impunity for illegal surveillance. There is a direct line from the impunity from Spain, spying on dissident voices, lawyers, journalists, and politicians, destroying democracy, and not to addressing the WikiLeaks revelations of US spying on 125 German officials, including Madame Merkel. Similarly, there is also a direct line to illegal surveillance by the US of Mr. Assange's privileged legal and medical conversations inside the sovereign embassy using a Spanish security firm. So, what this say about the rule of law in the United Kingdom and the Council of Europe if we, the guardians of the rule of law, say to okay for legal processes that forces an innocent and tortured journalist to admit to espionage in order not to die in a prison? Regarding journalist protections, the European Court of Human Rights views the solicitation and publication of information as essential journalistic activities, and Assange actions are protected under these principles. Further, the charges against Assange serve to deter journalists and whistleblowers from exposing US actions in the war on terror, despite no harm has been proven. In 14 years, the US has not shown that WikiLeaks publications caused any harm, which was acknowledged in the Manning trial and plea agreement. So, I urge you to vote in favor for this report, for the rule of law, for the human rights, and for democracy. Thank you, Chair. Thank you very much, Suna. Gracias, Julian Assange.
Thank you, Ms. Castell, and that concludes the list of speakers. As we still have some time, is there anyone here who would like to contribute in the debate? I don't see anyone. So we go to the procedure with the documents we have. Now I call the rapporteur, Ms. Avars-Todir, to reply. You have 3 minutes.
Thank you, Madam President. Dear colleagues, I would like to thank for this good debate about this important topic. And I would like to point out that if you look at the definition of a political prisoner, Julian Assange and his case fulfills this definition. He was convicted for engaging in acts of journalism. This is a clear instance of a politically motivated incarceration. If it were any other country, if it were one of the countries that we are happy to point towards having political prisoners on a regular basis here in the Parliamentary Assembly, I don't think that there would be much of a question on whether or not this assembly is fit to determine whether someone is or is not a political prisoner. We did indeed ourselves create this definition. So of course we are mandated to determine when someone fulfills this definition. We've done it many times before in other reports of this assembly. So we are not a court, but we are a standard-setting body of human rights. And if we shy away from telling the truth on this subject matter, I fear that we lose all credibility. It shouldn't matter where a person is incarcerated based on political grounds. It should matter that it happened and that we say that it shouldn't be allowed to happen. We must ask ourselves, what does this case say to those who risk their lives to report on corruption, war crimes, and human rights abuses? It says that if you dare to publish the truth, you may face the full wrath of the law, however archaic and unjust the law is. It says that in the struggle between power and truth, power will prevail. And that it is a message that no democratic society should ever allow its government to send. That is a message that the Assembly must forcefully reject. I have done my homework on this report. I have examined the aspects of this case very thoroughly. I have met with Julian Assange while he was in Belmarsh prison, and I am happy to welcome him here as a free man. But we must not allow his case to be repeated. We cannot allow the United States or any other state to sentence journalists for doing journalistic work, to chase them across borders, to send the message that you are not safe wherever you are if you report on secrets about war crimes, abductions, torture, secret prisons, the prisoners in Guantanamo Bay, that instead of the perpetrators of those crimes being prosecuted, the person that told us about them is put in prison and humiliated. I hope, dear colleagues, you can support this report. It's incredibly important, and I thank you all for this debate.
Thank you, Mrs. Savas-Todir, and I would like to ask Ms. Lesia Vasilenko if she would like to speak, if you would like to speak on the behalf of the committee.
Thank you, Madam President. And indeed, dear colleagues, on behalf of the Committee of the Legal Affairs and Human Rights, I would like to thank our rapporteur, Suna Avesdottir, for her excellent work on preparing this report. This report, which is about the core principles of justice, of openness, and of freedoms. I also thank all the members of the Assembly for their valuable contributions to our debate in this hemicycle today and for their participation in the exchanges with Julian Assange yesterday during the committee. Dear colleagues, the rapporteur achieved a very difficult goal of shortly and clearly presenting a very complex case that has captivated millions of people for the past 14 years. While the report devotes significant attention to Mr. Assange, it is clear that the consequences of his conviction under the Espionage Act will affect the entire media industry. First of all, the mere fact of Mr. Assange being indicted under the Espionage Act contributes to the creation of a chilling effect. Furthermore, he is, in fact, the first ever publisher to be convicted under this legislation, which was designed to punish spies and enemies of the state. The biggest threat is not just that journalists will now be prosecuted under the Espionage Act, it is further reaching. Editors and publishers will start discussing whether they can publish classified information that contributes to public debate. The climate of self-censorship must be avoided at all costs so that our societies can remain free and hold their governments to account. This, the rapporteur has rightly pointed out in the report. The draft resolution, which is before us today, aims towards reversing the dangerous trend of eroding media freedom. Dear colleagues, the committee has, by a large majority, agreed to the approach of our rapporteur. Therefore, I encourage you to support this report. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Vasilenko. We closed the debate. The Committee on Legal Affairs and Human Rights has presented a draft resolution to which 10 amendments have been tabled. I remind you that speeches on amendments are limited to 30 seconds. Any amendment which has been unanimously approved by the committee size for report shall not be put to the vote in plenary and shall be declared as definitely approved unless the 10 or more members of the Assembly object. I understand that Vice Chairperson of the committee wishes to propose to the Assembly that amendments 1 and 5 to the draft resolution, which were unanimously approved, be declared as approved. As for amendments 7, 8, and 10, which were also unanimously approved by the committee, we will have to deal with this separately because they interact with other amendments. Is that so, Mrs. Vasilenko?
Yes, President, this is so.
Thank you. If no objects, I will consider amendments 1 and 5 to be approved. No objection. amendments 1 to 5 to the draft resolution are therefore approved and will not be called. The request of the committee, I understand that amendments 2, 3 and 4 to the draft resolution were rejected by the committee with a 2/3 majority. However, as these amendments interact with other amendments, we will have to deal with this separately. I call Mr. Konstantinos Efstathiou to support Amendment 6. You have 30 seconds.
This amendment number 6 deals with a factual situation that 13 years since the publications, no evidence has been produced showing that WikiLeaks publications have harmed anyone. Thank you.
Thank you. Does anyone else wish to support this amendment? Is anyone against? Anyone would like to speak against this amendment? What is the committee's position on this amendment?
Has approved this amendment by 19 votes.
Thank you. I shall now put the amendment to the vote. The vote is open. The vote is closed. I call for the result to be displayed. The amendment is agreed. Now we go to the amendment number 2. I call Lord Richard Keane to support the amendment.
Why this isn't, it is now working. Colleagues, I don't intend to move Amendment 2. Thank you.
Okay, we speak then to the next amendment. Amendment number 7. I call Mr. Konstantinos Efstathiou to support the amendment. You have 30 seconds.
The essence of this amendment is that there's a reference and a reminder to basic principle of our organization, that is the freedom of expression. Thank you.
Thank you. Does anyone wish to speak against the amendment? None. The committee unanimously accepted this amendment. I shall now put the amendment to the vote. The vote is open. The vote is closed. I call for the result to be displayed. The amendment is approved. Thank you. We go now to amendment number 8, and I call Mr. Konstantinos Efstathiou to support the amendment.
Thank you. This amendment intends to give a more accurate picture of what happened in the process of we're discussing. So it's needed to have a most accurate picture of the situation. Thank you.
Thank you. Does anyone would like to speak against? None. So I put the amendment to the vote. The vote is open. The vote is closed. I call for the result to be displayed. Amendment is agreed. Amendment 8 is agreed. Now, amendment number 9, I call Mr. Konstantinos Evstathiou to speak on the amendment.
The amendment is self-explained. The definition of political prisoner coincides with the political action of Julian Assange. That is the reason of the table of this amendment. Thank you.
Thank you. If this amendment is adopted, Amendment 3 falls. Does anyone would like to speak against the amendment?
Thank you, colleagues. I would like to oppose this amendment. This underlines the point about political prisoner. And indeed, the mover of the motion rather, if I may put it this way, gave the game away. It's not the actions of Julian Assange that are critical, or which I would at all criticize. It's the definition of his detention within the United Kingdom. He was not detained as a political prisoner. That's a simple matter of legal fact. And if we ignore that, I think we devalue the report.
Thank you. What is the committee's position on this amendment?
Approved by large majority.
Thank you. I put the amendment to the vote now. The vote is open. The vote is closed. I call for the result to be displayed. Amendment is adopted.
16.
Amendment number 4. I call Lord Richard Keane to support.
I'm not going to move this amendment. Thank you.
So then we go to the next amendment number 10. I call Mr. Konstantinos Evstathiou to support the amendment.
Conclusions of the UN Special Rapporteur provide an objective framework of the whole affair, so this is the reason of this amendment.
Thank you. Does anyone wish to speak against the amendment? No. The committee unanimously accepted this amendment. I put the amendment to the vote now. The vote is open. The vote is closed. I call for the result to be displayed. Amendment is accepted. We will now proceed to vote on the draft resolution contained in document 16040 as amended. A simple majority is required. The vote is open.
Once you announce results, the sitting is going to resume at 11:55. Okay.
The vote is closed.
Draft resolution's adopted.
Yeah. I call for the result to be yes. The draft resolution is adopted. Thank you all, and I announce that the sitting will resume at 11:55.
I don't know. I don't see it possible. Generally speaking. Voilà.
Ladies and gentlemen, dear colleagues, now I have the pleasure to welcome among us Mr. Gabrielius Landsbergis, Minister of Foreign Affairs of Lithuania and President of the Committee of Ministers of the Council of Europe. This is the second time the Minister Landsbergis will address this Assembly in the context of the communication about the ongoing activities of the Lithuanian Presidency. Minister Landsbergis has also kindly accepted to respond to questions from the parliamentarians. Dear President, in your address to this Assembly in June, you insisted on the importance of being action-oriented towards ensuring that justice is done for Ukraine through inter alia, a comprehensive conversation mechanism, while focusing at the same time on expanding the membership of the Register of Damage for Ukraine and establishing a special international tribunal to reach and punish those who initiated the war of aggression against our member state, Ukraine. The Lithuanian presidency must also be congratulated for the opening for signature of the Convention on Artificial Intelligence in Vilnius in September, a major step in the protection of human rights. Dear President, thank you for being with us today and for having accepted this exchange of views. And without further ado, I have the honor to give you the floor.
Mr. President of the Parliamentary Assembly, members of Parliamentary Assembly, ladies and gentlemen, I appreciate this opportunity to once again address the distinguished Assembly in my capacity as President of the Committee of Ministers. I also welcome the new Secretary General, Alain Berset, and look forward to working with him and his team as current President of the Committee and beyond. Last time I spoke here, I put a heavy emphasis on Russia's unprovoked and illegal war of aggression against Ukraine. The situation has not changed since for the better, unfortunately. Quite the contrary, it keeps deteriorating in the wake of Russia's constant shelling of Ukrainian cities and other critical civilian infrastructure. Russian bombs kill innocent civilians. Russian troops kill Ukrainian prisoners of war, and Russia is progressively implicated in a long list of war crimes, which only grows longer. Just yesterday, when Ukraine was commemorating the Day of Defenders of Ukraine, Russian forces brutally executed 16 Ukrainian prisoners of war. War crimes, regrettably, are not just a figure of speech, but a grim reality taking place at the heart of 21st century Europe. Soon it is going to be 1,000 days since Russia, a permanent member of the United Nations Security Council, has started its full-scale invasion of Ukraine. 1,000 days of terror, which were preceded by almost 3,000 days of localized but intense violence in Crimea and the eastern part of Ukraine. All of that is of Russia's own making. 2 weeks ago, I visited Ukraine for the 9th time since the full-scale invasion. And yet again, I had to confront the dire consequences of Russia's ongoing aggression. Last September, Russia showered more than 1,300 Shahed-type drones on Ukrainian residential buildings, children's hospitals, schools, and supermarkets. And it fired almost 1,000 gliding bombs in the last week alone. As a result, nearly 80% of Ukraine's power generation capacity has been knocked out. The prospect of the upcoming winter is distressing. The people of Ukraine will most likely stay without electricity, without heating, and even without drinking water. While millions of Ukrainians fell victim to the horrors of a Holodomor 90 years ago, their compatriots of today, also counted in millions, will be exposed to Holodomor, and a deliberate attempt to make their life unbearable due to winter cold. On the top of it, Russia threatens the world with nuclear arms. The most recent example was just last week from the rostra of the UN General Assembly, with the world just sitting and watching. Is that all we can do? Just sit and watch? The lack of accountability, which promotes the sense of impunity, are the primary reasons that allow Russia to continue its terrible and senseless aggression. Our red lines and economic curbs have not been enough to constrain Russia. They are working, but not enough. Therefore, it is time to put even more pressure on Russia and ensure its full accountability for its crimes. Only this way we will lay the path towards a just, sustainable, and lasting peace for Ukraine. I commend the efforts of the Council of Europe to achieve this. Allow me to refer to the Conference of Ministers of Justice, which took place on the 5th of September in Vilnius. This informal conference, titled Towards Accountability for International Crimes Committed in Ukraine, adopted a declaration calling for an effective special tribunal for the crime of aggression. 42 states have already supported this declaration. This is not the only good news. In its meeting in Vienna recently, the core group has reached an agreement on the general concept of the special tribunal. We welcome the Council of Europe's decision to extend and share its valuable expertise during the drafting of its statute. The work of the Register of Damage for Ukraine is also progressing well. I'm glad to note that the 10,000th claim has been submitted to the registry just yesterday. The Presidency continues to advocate all eligible states to join it. Since the register is just the initial step towards a comprehensive compensation mechanism, we are pleased that several preparatory meetings on an international instrument to establish a claims commission for Ukraine have already taken place. We encourage all involved parties to move forward with the setting up of the Claims Commission. Further steps are urgently needed to protect the Ukrainian children against the systematic abuses by war, against unlawful transfer, deportation, and illegal adoption, against indoctrination with Russian propaganda and attempts to erase their ethnic identity. We commend the Council of Europe's decision to become a member of the International Coalition for the Return of Ukrainian Children. I look forward to the Council's active participation in it. Distinguished audience, the organization has proven to be at the forefront of real action against Russia's aggression, so let us not relent. Now, allow me to cover the main achievements by the Committee of Ministers since the last part session of the Assembly. They complement the priorities of the Lithuanian Presidency and are neatly integrated with them. In early July, Vilnius hosted a high-level conference on the European Social Charter. The members of the conference adopted Vilnius Declaration, which reinforces social rights and encourages additional commitments under the Charter. We are pleased to report that already 5 countries at the conference assumed additional commitments. The Council of Europe continues to focus on innovative issues. Thus, 9 states and the EU signed the Framework Convention on Artificial Intelligence, Human Rights, Democracy, and the Rule of Law on the 5th of September in Vilnius. The Vilnius Convention, as it will be known henceforth, is the first ever international legally binding treaty aimed at encouraging the development of AI in line with our values. As you know, Lithuania attaches high importance to the freedom of media and promotes it in various multilateral fora. Informal exchange of views with the partners of the Council of Europe's Safety of Journalists platform has taken place to discuss the best ways of enabling access to reliable information and countering disinformation, as well as assisting journalists in exile. Issues related to privacy and media freedoms from judicial perspective were discussed at an international conference in Vilnius. Situation in Belarus and its complicity in Russia's war of aggression against Ukraine remains high on our priority list. In particular, further deteriorating human rights situation and the high numbers of political prisoners in Belarus requires our immediate attention. These Belarusian citizens held in appalling conditions, often incommunicado, could in fact be called hostages of Lukashenko's regime. Belarus also continues to apply the death penalty, and the scope of its application is expanding. In this context, continuous support to the Belarusian democratic forces and civil society and their capacity building is crucial. By democratic forces and civil society, I mean their entire body, including the elements in exile. The Lithuanian Presidency organized a series of events dedicated to these issues. Exchange of views on the abolition of death penalty held by deputies, a workshop on advocacy for the abolition of death penalty for the youth of Belarus held in Vilnius in May. Distinguished members of the Assembly, it is regrettable that cooperation between Azerbaijan and the Council of Europe has reached a stalemate. Last July, the CPT Anti-Torture Committee issued a public statement to address the persistent lack of cooperation by Azerbaijani authorities. We are concerned about the reported violations of the right to freedom of expression and the imposition of disproportionate criminal sanctions to limit freedom of expression in Azerbaijan. Many of us also share the concern about the inclusion of distinguished members of this assembly in the no-entry list to Azerbaijan because of their voting positions. As the current presidency of the Committee of Ministers, we encourage Azerbaijan to respect its obligations as member state of the Council of Europe in the areas of human rights, democracy, and the rule of law. We stress the importance of an open and inclusive dialogue to resolve outstanding issues. We also continue being gravely concerned with the situation in Georgia. Several weeks before the elections, the ruling party continues its intimidation campaign against both the political opposition, civil society, and population at large. This is not in line with our values. This is not in line with the values of Council of Europe. I therefore urge Georgian members of parliament, diplomats present in this very room to assume their responsibility and make sure that Georgia is back on the path of democracy, rule of law, and on the path of Europe. Colleagues, on the administrative note, I am pleased to inform that the Committee of Ministers took note of the new people strategy for the period up to 2027. This is important for staff members and member states alike because it gives direction to the management of staff and its ability to adapt to a changing environment in order to meet the current and future challenges. Aligning the Secretariat employment with the Council of Europe membership is one of our presidency priorities. Therefore, it is positive that the new people strategy takes into consideration the Russian war of aggression against Ukraine and Russia's subsequent expulsion from the organization. Our presidency also attaches great importance to the interinstitutional dialogue to ensure the coherence and impact of our messages. Therefore, we immediately replied positively to the idea of convening a joint committee meeting during the PACE session, this PACE session. It will take place tomorrow on the topic of consequences of the Russian Federation's war of aggression against Ukraine, a top priority in itself on our respective agendas. Allow me to conclude by emphasizing that a just, lasting, and sustainable peace, as well as respect for human rights, democracy, and the rule of law, demand our collective effort. Let us show that we can deliver. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Minister Landsbergis. We will now proceed to questions to Minister Landsbergis. We will first hear questions from the speakers on behalf of the political groups, and then hear a response from the Minister to those questions. Please, will the speakers limit the interventions in 30 seconds? I remind colleagues that they should ask only one single question and not make speeches. On behalf of the Socialists, I call Azadeh Royan to take the floor.
Thank you, Mr. President, and thank you, Mr. Foreign Minister, for being here. Could you please elaborate on how the Committee of Ministers could even further respond to Azerbaijan's decision to impose bans on 76 members of the Parliamentary Assembly, an act that raises a lot of concerns about Azerbaijan's commitments to this assembly and to our values. I would also like to ask about Kosovo's ongoing application for membership in the Council of Europe. What steps is the committee taking to assess and advance this process? Thank you.
Thank you. Minister Landsbergis, would you like to respond?
Thank you so much for the questions. I will start with Azerbaijan. The decision taken by your assembly last January not to ratify the credentials of the Azerbaijani delegation was referred to during meetings of our ministers of deputies. The committee stressed the importance of an open and inclusive dialogue between PACE and Azerbaijan to resolve the current issues. Azerbaijan is a full-fledged member of the organization entitled to the same rights as all member states, while of course having the obligations to meet the Council of Europe standards. Decision of Azerbaijan to include members of PACE from national parliaments of the member states in the no-entry list because of their voting position is not acceptable. I invite Azerbaijani authorities to revoke that decision, to continue in good faith the engagement and cooperation with all institutions of the Council of Europe, and to return without delay to consultations with PACE leadership regarding the future of Azerbaijani delegation credentials. And now a few words about Kosovo. I've answered last time. I will just repeat what we constantly say. Lithuania fully supports Kosovo accession to the Council of Europe. Each application for membership is a standalone issue which requires an individual approach. This is particular with the case of Kosovo. But we believe that everyone in Kosovo, including all persons belonging to its Serbian minority, should have a European perspective and access to the European Court of Human Rights. Council of Europe action could encourage dialogue between the parties. As President of the Committee of Ministers, I'm open to listen to all Member States' positions on this issue. However, we are also following the unilateral decisions in Kosovo in recent months. The Presidency will do its best to work with all Member States to ensure a sound and fair process in the best interest of the Council of Europe and its Member States. The process should not divide us, but rather strengthen our unity. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister. On behalf of the EPP, the leader of the party, Mr. Pablo Hispan.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. Welcome, Minister. On behalf of the EPP, I want to say that we see a particular importance of reaching a clear agreement and making concrete decisions and particular steps to create the compensation mechanism that could build up on our success of the establishment.
Since the register officially opened the claim submission process, 10,000 claims have been submitted. As Presidency, we, first of all, focus on expansion of the membership of the Register of Damage. Second, promote further steps towards a comprehensive compensation mechanism, including the Claims Commission and the Compensation Fund. We welcome that discussions on the establishment of Claims Commission have already commenced, and 2 preparatory meetings took place in July and September with participation of 53 states and European Union.
Thank you, Minister. On behalf of the European Conservatives, Jurgis Klotins. I don't see him here, so I'm going on. On behalf of ALDE, Eric Kroes.
Thank you, President. Thank you, Minister, for your really comprehensive presentation. As you know, the Council of Europe has been in talks with the G7 and other key players about the potential charter of the Special Tribunal of the War of Aggression. And there is still certain misunderstandings so far, particularly concerning the immunity of the Troika. As you know, the Assembly strongly supports that there is no immunity. What can we do to achieve a positive result there, and what is the situation in the Committee of Ministers? Thank you.
The floor is yours, Minister.
Well, I will try to answer the best in the best way I can. So first of all, from the national capacity, Lithuania fully supports the immunity question, broadly, meaning that those responsible for the crime of aggression, but currently enjoying the privilege of immunity, should also be part of investigation in the special tribunal. The agreement is, as you very well know, is very difficult to find, and the consensus, I would say there is no consensus on this issue. So it is likely that the final decision would be made when the special tribunal is formed by the court itself, by the tribunal itself.
Thank you, Minister. Laura Costello, on behalf of the United European Left.
Thank you, Chair. Last year, the Ministry of Interior of Lithuania designated thousands of Belarusian and Russian citizens as a threat to national security based on their views on the Russian aggression. As a result, many of them were refused asylum, visas, or residence permits and live in precarious situations facing violence, no access to work or healthcare, and risk of being pushed back. And these include people from opposition and activists, and this is my point. I would like to ask what is the Lithuanian government doing to protect them and to improve the humanitarian conditions in the Lithuanian soil, part of the Council of Europe soil? Thank you.
Minister, would you like to respond?
Well, I would start by saying that Lithuania, since 2020, after the stolen election in Belarus, has offered an asylum for thousands of Belarusian refugees, fleeing aggression, fleeing persecution, unfair treatment, and in need of humanitarian assistance. This position has not changed. And as you mentioned in your question, the only question that is being asked by the people who try to enter Lithuania is their attitude towards Russia's war of aggression against Ukraine. And if there is a reason to believe that the person is supportive of Putin's actions, we don't believe that the person merits residence permit in Lithuania. Therefore, we don't believe that these people, because of their views, are under any danger in the country that they are fleeing from. Quite the opposite. Most people who support the war are doing quite well in Belarus and Russia. Those who do not support the war, they will always find shelter in Lithuania.
Thank you, Minister Landsbergis. I will now give the floor to other speakers and we'll take them in groups of 3. I would ask them to limit their interventions to 30 seconds. The first is Hripsaim Grigorian.
Mr. Minister, I'm here. A week ago, you had a meeting with your Armenian counterpart in New York, and views were exchanged on the dynamics of development in the South Caucasus. The importance of signing a peace agreement between Armenia and Azerbaijan has been stressed in the shortest possible terms, and Armenia is straightforward in readiness to do so without further delay. My question to you, Hans, is what will be done by the Lithuanian presidency to support the normalization between the two countries towards stability and long-awaited peace in our region? Thank you.
Thank you. Oleksiy Goncharenko is next.
Does it work? Oh, finally. Dear Mr. Landsbergis, first of all, I would like to thank Lithuania and Lithuanian people for all support to Ukraine and you personally for your leadership. My question is, and Lithuania is a big supporter, including military support to Ukraine. And my question is, does Lithuania put any restrictions on using of Lithuanian weapons, how Ukraine sees it should be used, including attacks on the military objects on the territory of Russian Federation? And in general, what do you think about such restrictions? Is it possible that they are put and Ukraine can't use the weapon in the way we need to use it? Thank you.
Thank you, Oleksiy. Koloman Brenner is next. Have you inserted your card first? Let's try once again.
Herr Präsident, jetzt. Entschuldigung.
Mr. Landsbergis, my question is, according to the Reykjavik Declaration of this institution, the rights of national minorities are especially precious, and this assembly should support them as well as our member states. And my question is, what steps are being considered, especially in view of the ethnic cleansing in Karabakh, showing how important these values are? Thank you.
I will now give the floor to Minister Landsbergis to respond to these three first questions.
Thank you so much. The first question regarding the situation on Armenia and Azerbaijan. So first of all, peace and stability in the Caucasus region are of key importance, not only for the people of Armenia and Azerbaijan, but to the Council of Europe as a whole. Last May, the Committee of Ministers expressed full support to the peace process based on the principles of mutual recognition of territorial integrity, respect of sovereignty, and the inviolability of borders, and non-use of force. It also welcomed the process of border delimitation based on the Almaty 1991 declaration. Political will at the highest level to normalize relations is key to reach a global peace agreement in full respect for each other's territorial integrity and sovereignty. I hope that both countries will soon be able to sign such agreement. Sustained open dialogue and signals of goodwill are needed to create a climate of trust conducive to reconciliation. The Lithuanian presidency stands ready to contribute to such process any way it can. From my own capacity, I understand that the talks are ongoing. Several drafts have been presented, and my very strong belief is now that there is a path forward. It very much depends on the goodwill of leaders to continue that path. That is the only prerequisite that is required now to reach sustainable peace between Armenia and Azerbaijan. And as I mentioned, Lithuania, in our national capacity and also as a presidency, will stand ready to do everything that it can. The second question about the weapons. Well, it's tough question, easy answer. Lithuania poses no restrictions on the weapons that are delivered to Ukraine, our weapons that are delivered on Ukraine. I find it rather unfortunate that we're still having this debate third year into the war. It limits Ukrainian ability to defend its country, defend its sovereignty, defend it under the international law, and defend it under the UN Charter. There are all the arguments of why it is needed have already been mentioned. And the most unfortunate thing is, in all of this is that by not allowing Ukraine to use the weapons the way it sees fit and that it needs to use, it might appear that we are defending the Russian assets more than we are defending Ukrainian. Well, on national minorities, very briefly, the upheavals of European history have shown that the protection of national minorities is essential to stability, democratic security, and peace. The Framework Convention on National Minorities Monitoring System has contributed to improving dialogue between governmental agencies and national minorities. It has also prompted the adoption of new laws devoted to the protection of national minorities and encouraged states to improve their non-discrimination legislation and practice. I strongly encourage all participants to engage constructively and efficiently with the ongoing monitoring cycles. And when it comes to Karabakh, the human rights of Karabakh Armenians living in Armenia are guaranteed by the European Convention of Human Rights and must be respected, including their right to safe return.
Thank you. The second round of questions, and I begin with Mr. Knut Abrahams.
This worked. Thank you, Mr. President. Dear Minister, I'd like to come back to Kosovo. Regrettably, the Committee of Ministers has ignored the very clear recommendation by PACE so far, despite Kosovo having fulfilled all conditions. My question is, isn't it time for a positive decision? What is the Committee of Ministers waiting for? Thank you.
Thank you. Nikos Tornaritis is next.
Once again. Okay.
I'm very sorry, dear Minister. In accordance with the recent decision of the Committee of Ministers to continue supervising the execution of the European Court of Human Rights rulings, how do you intend to urge Turkey to implement these decisions, particularly in relation to political prisoners? This issue was on the last agenda of the Committee of Ministers. We would like, therefore, to be informed of the outcome of this discussion and the next steps in exerting further pressure on Turkey and other member states who in general systematically disregard court judgments.
Thank you, Nikos. Matthias Johnson.
Thank you very much. During the April session, a large majority voted for Kosovo's membership here in POSER. Since the Declaration of Independence 2008, Kosovo has actively worked to become a part of the European community and recognized a sovereign state by over 100 countries, including majority of EU member states. So I can see that making significant progress to build a democratic rule of law with respect of human rights. So my question is more precise: when we can see Kosovo's membership on the Committee of Ministers' agenda? Thank you.
Thank you, Matthias. Minister Landsbergis, would you like to respond?
Thank you so much. So if members would allow, I would join the questions of Kosovo into one answer. Both are right questions, and it's a rightful expectation after the decisions of PACE and the recommendation of PACE. But I can tell you that consensus has not yet been found. The debate, when it's ongoing, and I mentioned that during my answer previously, that member states are noticing a certain unilateral decisions in Kosovo in recent months that does not add an appetite to find a consensus. And I used this opportunity to address the Minister of Kosovo that I met recently in New York, just last week, about where we are. We continue to stand with Kosovo. We continue to look for the ways how to implement the PACE recommendation. Lithuania truly believes that it's the right thing to do, but unfortunately we're not there yet. And certain activities that Kosovo is taking on is not necessarily conducive to that agenda. Now, question from one more question. Yes. Okay. The Committee of Ministers has the unique role under Article 46 of the Convention to supervise the execution of the European Court's judgments. The Convention system is our foundation. Since its inception, almost 80% of all the violation judgments given by the Court have been fully executed. This very high figure explains why our system has been called the best system of human rights protection in the world. Nonetheless, important challenges do remain. As I have stated in front of this Assembly, in June, executing final judgments of the European Court of Human Rights is not a choice, but an international legal obligation accepted voluntarily by the Member States. Full and swift execution of the Court's judgments by all Member States is vital for the Convention system and a priority for the Council of Europe.
Have you finished, Minister? Okay. May I proceed to next questions? Minister, have you finished? Have you finished your answers? Okay, thank you. So, next is Enis Kerben.
Thank you, President. Dear Minister, today is fourth time question about Kosovo because it's very important. I am a member of the Kosovo's delegation to PACE, representing the non-majority communities. I am concerned that the PACE recommendation on Kosovo's Council of Europe membership is yet to be addressed in the Committee of Ministers. Kosovo's communities have worked for over 2 decades to build an inclusive environment acknowledged by PACE reporters. We are puzzled by the continued blockage of Kosovo's membership, thus blocking us from gaining more rights through the Council of Europe Convention, and which limits our access to European Court for Human Rights, which is very important for us non-majority communities. This delay seems driven by political arguments unrelated to the Council of Europe's mandate. Dear Minister, could you please advise when the Committee of Ministers expected to address the PACE opinion, as foreseen by the Statute and Rules of Procedure of Council of Europe, and vote in favor of Kosovo's membership to Council of Europe? Thank you.
Mia Petra Kumpula-Natri is next.
Children of Ukraine. There's not a day to rest. But I will ask you how to integrate civil society more with our work. The Council does in principle recognize the invaluable role of civil society in all its line of work, not only by declaration from the Reykjavik Summit and principles of democracy, but also the roadmap for engagement. I would like to see this in principle translating to more in practice. Unlike in authoritarian states, NGOs working with us, with our values and aim, can play a major role, for example, combating democratic backsliding and, for example, helping Ukraine on our fight for our democracies.
Thank you, Mia Petra. Armen Gevorkyan.
Mr. Minister, in May you participated at an opposition rally in Tbilisi and called upon the Georgian government to adopt certain political course, I quote, before it is too late. Do you consider it feasible that any political rally can be held in neighboring Azerbaijan? And if a chance is provided, will we also see you participating at such a protest in Baku? For example, calling for immediate and unconditional release of illegally held Armenian prisoners, including former leadership of Nagorno-Karabakh. Where is the before it is too late call for Azerbaijan? Thank you.
Elizaveta Iasko. Minister, since there are two more, I prefer to give all parliamentarians and then you can have all the time to reply.
As the reporter in support of developing political negotiations to facilitate the exchange of the prisoners of war, I want to ask a very specific question. What could be the mechanism and very concrete step that could help us in this organization to facilitate the exchange of the prisoners of war in Ukraine and Russia?
Thank you, Elizaveta. And the last one is Ariana Musliu-Sosi. Minister, you have the time to respond if you wish.
Okay, so I will start with the first question, which basically I'm just ready to acknowledge the question. I have very little to add. Let's continue the work during our presidency and, if needed, beyond that. The second question was about the civil society and interaction of Council of Europe with the civil society. The Council of Europe is Europe's leading human rights organization, bringing together governments to build a future based on human rights, democracy, and justice. Civil society is an important element of that mission, and whilst it always played its part, its involvement has grown over the years. It is crucial to engage closer with civil society in the development and implementation of this important Council of Europe and also Presidency's agenda. Let me confirm that Lithuanian Presidency attaches a great importance to the work of the civil society. This is why we held several meetings with their participation, also at the level of ambassadors. They had also been associated to the conferences we organized during our presidency. We maintain our support for those who within autocratic countries or in exile remain committed to the values of democracy, human rights, and the rule of law. Now, a few words on Azerbaijan. I'd like to stress that each member of Council of Europe should be able, in each of the country, rallies of opposition or non-governmental organizations or civil society should be organized if they're needed so. What I was specifically addressing in Georgia is the European path. While adopting the laws and taking the direction Georgia shifted from the European path of European integration. That was my specific message. In my personal capacity, as a Minister of Foreign Affairs, I've been standing for the fight of freedom wherever that was needed. And if I would find myself in the position where I need to speak out on a case of abuses in Azerbaijan, I would do that. But I have to stress, in my personal and national capacity. And okay, the last question in this round on prisoners exchange. The situation of Ukrainian prisoners of war and their treatment by Russia is an issue of obviously great concern. There are numerous reports of violations of their human rights and international law of the Geneva Convention. The release of Ukrainian prisoners of war must be our top priority. It should also be an issue for the organization itself. Strongly believe that we must assist Ukraine to work with this issue on every opportunity we have to raise public awareness, to employ all instruments at our disposal, and to seek help of third countries where it is possible. The Committee of Ministers will consider any proposals in this respect coming from the Parliamentary Assembly. Thank you.
So, dear colleagues, that brings us to an end the questions. Mr. Landsbergis, I want to thank you so much for being with us today and answering questions being addressed to you by my colleagues in this hemicycle. Warmly thanks. And this sitting is adjourned. The Assembly will hold its next public sitting this afternoon at 3:30 p.m. with the agenda approved on Monday.